It's a fair question, and it's going to feel even more personal in 2026 because expensive isn't an abstract word anymore. It's the moment you tap your card at the grocery store and the total jumps higher than you expected. It's the rent renewal email that makes your stomach drop. It's the insurance premium that rises even when nothing happened. It's the quiet realization that you can be working hard, doing what you were told to do, and still feel like life is sliding out of reach. So let's talk about why living in the United States could be so expensive in 2026. Not in the simplistic way people argue online, not in the partisan way news panels shout at each other, but in the way that actually helps you understand what's happening when you're standing in line at the pharmacy or searching for an apartment at midnight, hoping you'll find something that doesn't feel like a scam. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The cost of living doesn't rise for one reason. It rises when multiple systems start pushing in the same direction. And in 2026, several forces that have been building for years are likely to collide at the same time. That's why the experience will feel like pressure coming from everywhere. Housing, food, healthcare, transportation, childcare, education, utilities, insurance, taxes, even basic services that used to be background noise will start demanding attention. And I'm going to make you a promise right now. If you stay with me through this, you'll walk away with something more valuable than a list of complaints. You'll have a mental model. You'll be able to look at a headline or a bill and say, oh, this is that force at work. And once you can name the forces, you can respond intelligently instead of emotionally. You can make better decisions. You can protect your future. Not because you can control everything, but because you can stop being surprised. Let's start with the big picture, because the big picture explains why so many people feel like their money is evaporating, even if the official numbers claim things are fine. The United States can have low unemployment and still feel expensive. It can have strong GDP growth and still feel expensive. It can have stock markets doing well and still feel expensive. Those things aren't contradictions. They're the result of how modern economies distribute gains and how inflation works in real life. When people hear inflation, they think of prices rising across the board, like a tide lifting every boat equally. But inflation doesn't behave that politely. Inflation hits different categories differently. It often hits essentials harder, especially when supply is constrained. In other words, the things you can't easily stop buying, housing, food, energy, insurance, healthcare, can rise faster than the things you can delay or replace. That's why inflation feels cruel. It targets what you need, not what you want. Now add another reality. In 2026, a lot of what you'll feel will be lag. Economic policy and economic consequences don't happen on the same day. There's a delay between actions and outcomes, between interest rate decisions, and the moment they show up in rents, mortgage approvals, business closures, layoffs, wage negotiations, government budgets, and consumer behavior. People often look at 2026 and think it's a new problem, but it's more accurate to see it as the year when long-running trends finally become impossible to ignore. So why could it be expensive to live in the United States in 2026? Let's walk through the major drivers, the ones that shape daily life, the ones that make a country feel unaffordable even if it's still wealthy on paper. The first driver is housing, because housing isn't just another expense. Housing is the platform everything else sits on. When housing is expensive, your entire life becomes expensive because it changes your commute, your childcare options, your savings rate, your stress levels, your health, your relationships, your ability to take risks, your ability to leave a bad job, your ability to start a business, your ability to breathe. In 2026, housing could remain expensive for a few structural reasons that are not easy to fix quickly. One of them is supply. The US has had years, really decades, of underbuilding in many high-demand areas, and restrictive zoning rules in many places have limited what can be built and where. When you have a growing population in certain regions, or even just a concentrated demand for certain job markets, and you don't expand housing supply enough, you get a bidding war. And bidding wars don't care about your feelings, they care about scarcity. Another reason is the lock-in effect. After years where many homeowners secured low mortgage rates, a huge number of people are financially trapped in the homes they already have. They don't want to sell, because selling means giving up a cheap mortgage and buying again at a higher rate, even if the home price is similar. This reduces turnover. It reduces inventory. And reduced inventory keeps prices elevated. Even if demand cools slightly, supply can cool more, and the pressure stays. Rent can stay high for similar reasons. If fewer people move, fewer units come onto the market. If construction costs remain high, materials, labor, permits, financing, new supply comes slower and at higher price points. And if landlords face higher insurance, maintenance, and property tax costs, those costs eventually get passed on. That doesn't mean every rent increase is justified. It means the math of ownership has changed. In 2026, the rent you pay may reflect not just the value of the apartment, but the rising cost of everything that surrounds it. And here's a brutal detail most people don't think about. Housing prices don't need to be rising fast for housing to feel unaffordable. If prices stay high and interest rates stay relatively elevated compared to the era of ultra-cheap money, monthly payments remain painful. A home that cost the same in 2 different years can feel dramatically different if the financing cost changes. That's why the market cooled can be technically true, while your monthly payment reality still says no. Now let's talk about the second driver. Healthcare and insurance, which in the US is not just a system, it's a gravity field. It pulls money toward it relentlessly, and it doesn't ask permission. Healthcare costs rise for many reasons at once: administrative complexity, pricing power, high-cost procedures, chronic disease burdens, new drugs, high labor costs for skilled medical staff, and the fact that the system often operates like a set of negotiating empires rather than a transparent market. In 2026, even if you're healthy, you may feel healthcare inflation through premiums, deductibles, co-pays, and out-of-network surprises. And if you're not healthy, the system can feel like a second rent payment. Insurance is part of this story beyond healthcare. Auto insurance, homeowners insurance, renters insurance, these can rise due to repair costs, medical costs, litigation costs, theft rates, accident severity, and climate-related risks. Even if you never file a claim, you can still pay more because the risk pool is changing and because the cost of claims is rising. In 2026, insurance could be one of those silent line items that grows until it's no longer silent. Third driver, food and energy. These feel basic, almost primal, because they are. When food is expensive, you don't just feel financially stressed, you feel psychologically threatened. Food costs are influenced by supply chains, fuel prices, fertilizer, labor, weather, and global commodity dynamics. Even small disruptions can ripple into shelf prices. In 2026, food could stay expensive, not necessarily because of one catastrophic event, but because the baseline cost structure, labor, transportation, packaging, compliance, financing, remains higher than the pre-shock world many people still compare against in their heads. Energy is similar. Energy is the hidden ingredient in everything: shipping, heating, cooling, manufacturing, services. When energy costs rise, they show up everywhere, even if you never see the label energy on your receipt. In 2026, electricity bills and gas prices can feel like a tax on existence, especially in regions where infrastructure is stressed or where extreme weather increases demand. Fourth driver, the labor market and wages. And here's where you need to be careful. People often say wages need to rise. And yes, wages rising can help. But wages rising can also chase prices if productivity doesn't rise as fast. And wages don't rise evenly. Some sectors see big wage gains, others stagnate. In 2026, one reason the country can feel expensive is that the price of essentials is moving faster than the wages of a large portion of workers. There's also a deeper issue. The US labor market can look healthy in aggregate, while individuals feel squeezed because the jobs being created don't necessarily match the cost structure of the regions where people live. You can have job growth in services, gig work, and lower wage sectors, while housing remains priced for a different income reality. That mismatch creates a feeling of running on a treadmill that's slightly too fast. You're moving, you're working, you're sweating, but you're not getting ahead. Then there's the technology and automation factor, which is complicated. Technology can lower the cost of some goods and services, but it can also reshape employment, reduce bargaining power in some categories, and concentrate profits in certain companies or regions. In 2026, you might notice a weird split. Some things get cheaper and better: electronics, certain digital services, while the things that require physical space, regulated industries, and human labor remain expensive. You can have a phone in your pocket with more computing power than a past decade's supercomputer and still struggle to afford rent. That's not a paradox. That's the modern economy showing you what is scalable and what is constrained. Fifth driver, government budgets and the cost of capital. When interest rates rise, they don't just affect mortgages. They affect everything that relies on financing: business expansion, construction, consumer credit, local government projects, and the cost of servicing national debt. In 2026, if the cost of borrowing remains meaningfully higher than the free money era, that cost becomes embedded in the economy. Businesses pass financing costs into prices. Developers pass financing costs into rents. Governments face higher debt servicing costs, and that can lead to harder choices, spending cuts, higher fees, or different tax strategies. This matters because people often assume that if inflation cools, everything goes back to normal. But price levels don't usually go back unless there's deflation, and deflation comes with its own risks. More commonly, inflation slows, but the higher price level remains. That means the pain stays, just without the drama of rapid increases. And in 2026, many households could still be living in a world where prices are higher than their mental reference point and wages have not fully caught up. Sixth driver: education, childcare, and what I'll call the cost of stability. In the US, a lot of expenses are not about luxury. They're about maintaining a stable life, safe childcare so you can work, education pathways so your kids can compete, certifications so you can access better jobs, transportation so you can show up, and a safety buffer so one emergency doesn't ruin you. Childcare in particular can feel like a second mortgage in some regions. It's labor intensive, heavily regulated, and demand is inelastic because parents need it. In 2026, childcare costs can stay high because the industry struggles to balance affordability for parents with fair wages for workers and sustainable business models for providers. That triangle is brutal. Someone pays, and too often, parents pay. Higher education and training can also feel like an expensive toll road. Even when alternatives exist, online learning, certifications, apprenticeships, the signaling power of traditional credentials still matters in some fields. In 2026, people may be forced to spend more on skills just to stay competitive in a labor market shaped by AI tools, automation, and changing employer expectations. That doesn't mean everyone needs a degree. It means the pressure to keep upgrading skills becomes constant. And constant upgrading has a cost in money, time, and stress. Seventh driver: transportation and the geography problem. The US is a big country designed around cars in many areas. That means living costs include not just gas, but maintenance, repairs, insurance, depreciation, parking, tolls, and the cost of replacing a vehicle when it inevitably ages out. Even if gas prices are stable, the cost of repairs can be high because parts and labor are expensive. In 2026, a single major car repair can wipe out a month of savings for many households. Transportation is one of those costs you can't easily cancel. You can downgrade entertainment subscriptions. You can't downgrade getting to work. Eighth driver: the psychology of expensive and how it spreads. This might sound strange, but perception becomes reality in consumer behavior. When people feel squeezed, they become more risk averse. They save less if they can't. They take on debt if they have to. They delay big purchases. They become more sensitive to price changes. That shifts the economy. Companies react, landlords react, lenders react, policymakers react. And the feedback loop can keep the cost of living pressure alive. Because once the public expects prices to rise, the economy becomes more tolerant of price increases. People hate it, but they accept it, and acceptance is oxygen for high prices. Now, I want to address something directly, because it's one of the most confusing parts of the US cost of living story. People will say, but the economy is strong, and other people will say, no, it's terrible. Both sides can be telling the truth from different angles. The US can be strong in total output and still be unaffordable for a large share of the population because wealth and income gains can concentrate. Asset prices can rise faster than wages. Housing can act like a gatekeeping system. And when essentials become expensive, the economy becomes emotionally expensive. The stress becomes part of the cost. In 2026, you might see an economy where certain groups do quite well. People with assets, people in high-demand skills, people in strong regions, while other groups feel like they're being priced out of normal life. And that brings us to a crucial point. In the US, the cost of living is not one cost, it's multiple Americas. There's an America where $100,000 a year feels comfortable, and another America where $100,000 a year feels like you're one emergency away from panic. In 2026, that gap can widen because regional housing markets, insurance markets, and job markets move differently. Two households can earn the same income and live entirely different financial lives depending on location and fixed costs. So when you ask, why will it be expensive in 2026? Part of the answer is because fixed costs have been rising and have become more rigid. Fixed costs are the most dangerous kind. Rent, insurance, debt payments, childcare, healthcare premiums, these are costs you can't negotiate day to day. Once fixed costs get too high relative to income, your financial life loses flexibility. You stop making choices and start making compromises. In 2026, many people might feel that shift. Less freedom, more survival math. Now let's talk about debt and credit, because debt is a hidden engine of expensive. When prices rise and wages lag, households often bridge the gap with credit cards, buy now, pay later plans, personal loans, car loans with long terms, and sometimes tapping home equity if they have it. Credit can make life look affordable short term and become a trap long term. If interest rates remain higher than the ultra-low era, carrying debt becomes more punishing. In 2026, even a small amount of revolving debt can feel like a leak in your boat. You keep scooping water out, but the leak keeps draining you. This is also where the system becomes emotionally manipulative without trying to be. When people are financially stressed, they become more vulnerable to easy answers. They blame one villain. They chase one miracle solution. They get pulled into narratives designed to trigger outrage rather than understanding. In 2026, the country could be full of shouting about why things are expensive, but very little clarity about how the machine works. So let me simplify the machine for you in a way you can remember. The cost of living rises when scarcity increases, when the cost of capital rises, when supply chains and labor costs remain elevated, when regulation and compliance costs grow, and when expectations shift so that higher prices become normal. That's the machine. And in 2026, multiple parts of that machine may still be active. But here's the part most people forget. Not all inflation is the same. Some inflation is demand-driven, where too much money chases too few goods. Some inflation is cost-driven, where the inputs, labor, energy, financing become more expensive. Some inflation is policy-driven, where decisions create constraints or incentives that shift costs. In 2026, the US could be dealing with a mix of all three. That's why it won't feel like a simple fix. It will feel like a complicated pressure. Now, I told you I'd give you a mental model and not just problems. So here's the model you can use in your own life. Ask yourself three questions whenever a cost spikes. First, is this cost scarce by nature? Housing in high-demand areas is scarce. Childcare is scarce. Specialized healthcare is scarce. If it's scarce, it tends to stay expensive unless supply expands. Second, does this cost depend on financing? Housing, cars, construction, business investment, even local government services depend on financing. If financing is expensive, the end product is expensive. Third, is this cost heavily regulated or tied to insurance, healthcare, housing development, energy infrastructure, education, certain services? Regulation can be necessary, but it can also add layers of cost and slow supply. Insurance can protect people, but it can also act like a rising tax if risk pools become more expensive. When you can classify costs this way, you stop being confused. You start seeing the pattern. Now I want to bring this down from the macro level into something painfully concrete. What could the average person experience in 2026? You might experience sticker shock fatigue. That's when you're tired of being surprised, the constant recalibration. You go to buy something simple, and you feel that tiny jolt. Wait, when did it become this much? Over time, that fatigue becomes resignation, and resignation changes behavior. People cook at home more, delay medical visits, postpone family plans, move in with roommates longer than they wanted, avoid having kids, avoid changing jobs, avoid taking risks. That's not just personal, that's economic. You might experience what I'll call the slow squeeze. Not a dramatic crash, not a dramatic boom, just a steady tightening. The bills rise, the renewals rise, and the raise you get doesn't create relief. It creates temporary balance. That's why people feel like they're working just to stay in place. You might also experience the two-price world. In a two-price world, luxury becomes weirdly accessible. Cheap gadgets, streaming, fast fashion, while basics become premium. In 2026, someone can buy a new screen or upgrade a phone and still be stressed about groceries. People will judge that behavior as irrational. It's not irrational, it's psychological survival. Small dopamine purchases feel like control in a world where big necessities feel uncontrollable. And you might experience higher volatility. One month feels manageable. The next month something hits. A car repair, a medical bill, an insurance renewal, a rent hike. In an expensive environment, surprises become disasters. So what do you do with this? Do you just accept it and panic? No. You respond with strategy, not fantasy. Strategy. First, you protect your flexibility. Flexibility is the new wealth. That means lowering fixed costs where possible, even if it bruises your pride. It means avoiding locking yourself into long-term payments you can't escape. It means treating your monthly obligations like a diet. The heavier it gets, the less agile you become. Second, you build income resilience. In 2026, one income stream can feel fragile. That doesn't mean you need a complicated hustle culture lifestyle. It means you develop a skill that can travel, a service you can offer, a way to earn that isn't tied to one employer's mood. The goal isn't to become rich overnight. The goal is to reduce the fear of one job loss destroying your life. Third, you stop confusing nominal gains with real gains. If your income rises 5% but your essentials rise 10%, you didn't get ahead. You got a smaller loss. The solution is not just earning more, but earning more in a way that outpaces the essentials. That usually means skill leverage, not just time. Fourth, you become smarter about location. This is the hardest one emotionally because people have roots. But in an expensive country, geography becomes destiny. If your income is flexible, moving to a region with lower fixed costs can be like getting a massive raise without changing your job. In 2026, more people might make decisions based on cost of living math rather than identity, and that can reshape communities. Fifth, you take care of your health and your financial hygiene. That sounds boring. Boring is powerful. In an expensive environment, preventable problems become unaffordable problems. The goal isn't perfection, it's reducing the frequency of expensive emergencies. Now, I want to close the loop on the promise I made earlier, the truth that most people don't want to hear, but that can set you free. The truth is that expensive isn't just about prices, it's about fragility. When systems are fragile, costs rise because risk rises. When supply is fragile, prices rise. When health is fragile, premiums rise. When infrastructure is fragile, utilities rise. When households are fragile, debt rises. And when debt rises in a higher rate world, life becomes expensive, even if nothing dramatic changes. In 2026, the United States could feel expensive because the era of easy affordability, cheap money, abundant housing supply in key regions, predictable insurance costs, stable expectations has been replaced by a more constrained reality. Not necessarily a hopeless reality, but a reality where you have to be more intentional. You have to play the game with your eyes open. And if you take nothing else from this, take this. The best defense against an expensive world is clarity. Clarity about what is structural and what is temporary. Clarity about what you can control and what you can't. Clarity about where your money is actually going and why. Because once you have clarity, you stop wasting energy on confusion. You stop being hypnotized by noise. You start making moves that compound. Small moves, smart moves. The kind that don't look dramatic in a week but can change your life in a year. So yes, living in the United States in 2026 could be expensive. But expensive doesn't have to mean powerless. It can mean you finally stop operating on autopilot. It can mean you build flexibility. It can mean you invest in skills that the economy can't easily replace. It can mean you reduce fixed costs before they reduce you. It can mean you stop chasing appearances and start building resilience. And that shift, from reacting to predicting, is what separates people who feel trapped from people who navigate. Stay sharp, stay practical, stay calm. The expensive world punishes panic, but it rewards strategy. Thank you.